So is SIBO testing legitimate? This is the second video on this topic that I'm putting out there. The first video, if you haven't watched it and you're interested in this topic, please check it out. But in that video, I basically discuss how some of the clinicians or researchers that have concerns or skepticism about the reliability and validity of the test, they cite studies that are, in my opinion, not predicated on incredibly sound research principles, shall we say. And so anyways, please watch that video if you want more information about that. So I feel that using that as an argument for the SIBO testing is not a very legitimate test. I don't think it's a strong leg to stand on. One of the reasons, a main reason why I feel that SIBO testing is very legitimate and why I use it in my practice all the time is because in clinical practice, it's a really, really helpful, reliable test. So if a test is just really kind of out in left field, if it's just kind of random, incredibly unreliable, again, some of the studies show that the reliability is like 80 to 100% reliable, then other ones say it's down to like the 20s, which sounds awful. And again, watch video 1 for the details of why there's such a discrepancy there, at least in my opinion. But if a test really was incredibly unreliable, if it was down like in the 20% range or the 50% range even, then in clinical practice, we would see a lot of variability, a lot of, I should say, unpredictability and variability in the test results that we'd see. So in other words, patient comes in, they've got gas and bloating and constipation, and they feel worse when they eat complex carbs, and so we test them and they have tons and tons of methane overproduction on their breath test. So it's like, okay, you've got methane gas producing SIBO. So the symptoms fit the clinical, like the test results. So if the test was very inaccurate or if the test was very unreliable, then what we'd expect is that when we see patients like that, and I've seen hundreds of patients like that, then on the retest we'd see, oh well, we're treating you and you're feeling better, and then we'd see like, oh, now the results are even higher, or the results are showing you're still symptomatic but there's no SIBO at all, or we would see like, oh, this time it's showing there's high methane, and then the next time we retest it's it's high hydrogen, and the next time it's high methane. Like we would just see this hodgepodge of results. And there are tests out there that are like that. For example, when patients get micronutrient profiles done, where it's like, oh, here's a blood sample and it's going to tell you about like dozens of different nutrient levels in the blood. That type of testing, when I've seen retests of that, it's like you might as well spin a roulette wheel in terms of what you're going to get. Based on my clinical experience, that's part of why I don't recommend those tests. But in terms of SIBO testing, it is as linear as any test might be. It's like, oh, you're symptomatic, you test positive, we treat you, you're feeling better, your levels are coming down. You're asymptomatic now, your levels look normal. You were doing great, and then you went on a carb fest, and now you're symptomatic again, and we retest you, and look, your SIBO is growing back. It is in 90+% of cases, in my experience, and I've treated over 2,000 cases of SIBO up to this point, so lots of experience there. I've consulted on many others, on my residents and other colleagues and whatnot, so lots and lots of SIBO experience. It's a very, very linear, predictable test in terms of it not throwing curveballs out there very often. Now, there are certainly going to be times when a patient tested positive for methane, and now they're testing positive for hydrogen, and that happens for certain reasons, and it's an unmasking phenomenon. And anyways, there's explanations behind some of those results, where sometimes I have had patients where they're doing the treatment, they're say feeling 50% better, still not 100%. We retest to see where we're sitting, and their levels are higher than they were before, and there's explanations behind that as well. And oftentimes in that case, it's related to biofilms. But even in, say, those cases where it might seem like, oh, well, that seems, kind of dubious, like, isn't that a double standard? No, because then in those cases, once we treat the biofilms or we switch up the herbs they're working with to get on top of the microbes, then on the subsequent test, they're like, oh, I'm feeling even better, and then their levels start to come down. So we don't see this, like, unpredictability of these tests in clinical practice, at least based on my extensive experience. So in my opinion, the lactulose breath test for SIBO is a very legitimate test because I feel that the main accusations of illegitimacy are predicated upon referencing studies that were not conducted in the, well, nothing against the way they were conducted, just they're anyways, as I say in the first video, there were flaws in the study designs. And so where that's a main argument, it's like, well, there's flaws in the study design, so does that argument really hold up? And then in clinical practice, which is kind of the other side of the story, because what we see in research is one thing, but what we actually see in the real world and practice can be something totally different. It really is a very useful test in my clinical experience. I think it's just fantastic, and I really have very little to say about it except for positive things, although it is kind of a pain in the neck to do the prep and blow in all the tubes and all of that stuff. So it's a little bit logistically cumbersome, but I think it's a very useful and I feel very reliable test. Yes, every test has its flaws. I can't claim that it's a perfect test, but I think it's very, very good in my experience. So I hope that this information is useful. I did think about kind of geeking out on this a little bit more and bringing up some other things around this. I probably could have extended this into a 6-part series on is SIBO testing legitimate, but I understand that not everybody who listens and watches my videos might be interested in SIBO, so I don't want to niche down too much. But if you do have any questions about this, or if there are any other topics that you'd like me to speak about, just post in the comment section below, and I will do so as soon as I'm able to.